Hi, everybody. Welcome to HMH's Future of Transportation podcast. I'm John Halpin. I'm here to continue our series of chats with experts in the transportation industry. Joining me today is Erik Bakke from AMPLY Power. Erik has, I think I'm reading from your LinkedIn profile, Erik, has more than 20 years experience in the energy industry, focusing closely on distributed energy solutions and developing EV charging as a service infrastructure projects in the public and private electric transportation sectors. Erik, thanks a lot for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, John. It's a pleasure.
So I noticed that when so your title, I noticed is senior sales manager, but I noticed you have an engineering background. You have an engineering degree, right?
That's correct. Yeah. In the 90s, I was focused on power generation right from the beginning. I started it with General Electric running around the world, increasing the efficiency of steam cycles for power generation, both nuclear and even gas turbines, and combined
Right.
cycles. I realized in the late 90s that we installed hundreds of these super high efficiency gas turbines and
Mhm.
steam cycles, but we were running out of natural gas at the time, right? And I thought, wow, what have I done? Well, we're reaching peak natural gas. Of course, that was before the shale revolution
Yep.
and everything else. So at that point, I realized solar is abundant, unlimited, and as the cost curve has come down to the point where it makes sense. So I made the move in the mid 2000s, and I've been in renewables and now electric vehicles for ever since.
So you were an early entrant into electric vehicles and renewables, if it's the early
Well, I would say
2000s, right?
renewables for sure. I was sort of right at the beginning of solar when it was, most people said, "Oh, that'll never work." And I really believed it would. I really understood the value and the fact that you know at the time solar would offset peak energy during the middle of the day, which was our most expensive energy, right?
Hmm.
And it fits so well to use the most abundant source to offset the peak energy period of the day. Now in California, we've gone the other way. We've got so much solar in the evening now, we're running out of energy, and that's our peak. Anyway, that's a whole
Yep.
different story.
In the evening, and now you're going to have permanent daylight savings time. It looks like so you're going to have
Yeah,
even more in the
right.
evening. That's a whole other story I'm not going to get into. But anyway, all right. So you focus on fleets with your current position. Tell me, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the most knowledgeable, what is the typical awareness level of electrification and electric charging for let's say new customers or potential customers for you? Are they pretty well versed, or is it like, all right, what do I have to do here with this electric stuff? Is it, where are they?
It varies completely. The market is early, and it depends on whether they're mandated, right? Like the public
Yeah.
transit schools, or whether they're mandated by their corporate ESG goals, right? It depends on what's driving them and in terms of how far along they are. I'd say it's hard to put a number on, any
Okay.
particular. They're all over the place. So on
Gotcha.
average, I'd say we're at about a 3, right? Because there's
Yeah.
a lot of them don't really know what they don't know yet. That's
Hmm.
the problem. It's a totally different change for them.
It's funny that you're the second person in a week I've heard that exact phrase from. They don't know what they don't know. It's really interesting. It's really interesting. So you talked about public and private. So the public sector is being mandated increasingly on doing
Correct.
this. The private sector is kind of being mandated by customers, boards,
Shareholder.
share, right, that kind of stuff. Who's If you had to pick public or private, who's more advanced? Who's doing this better at this point?
Oh boy, again, I don't know if there's anybody doing it better,
Hmm.
because they have different drivers, and public versus private is completely different organizational setup, right? In some ways, I like the public better because it's sort of a known path. You know where you're going. Whereas private, they're just out there trying to figure out what are the options, right? I
Right.
think private will soon, embrace and become much more knowledgeable and professional.
Mhm.
But public's kind of ahead of the game right now, and it's a little bit more of a clear straight line to where they're going. So
Got it.
neither one's better, but they're different.
Okay. So for either side, what are the biggest concerns? Like we talked about, there's certain things they don't know, but are there concerns, hesitations, barriers to entry for this? What are the biggest ones that you hear?
There definitely is. CapEx, right? It's a big capital expenditure to start with, and they're shocked at first, right? Depending on the level of subsidies, and like I said, public, they have certain subsidies and what have you available for the vehicles, but also for the infrastructure, right? They're looking at that and saying, "Wow, that's a big expense." But the promise of lowered operating costs balances, right? So they're building their model and saying, "Well, but can I really get there?" Because when you really look at electric, the variable on the cost of that fuel, it could vary 300-400% in a day,
Hmm.
in a week, in a month, right? And it's
Right.
all over the place, right? If you don't manage it correctly, right?
Yep.
So the promise of lower operating of OpEx, right, versus CapEx, they're concerned. Am I really going to reach that payback?
Yeah.
That's the tough part.
Okay. Um, so I'm going to read a line from your website. With intelligent software and an innovative support model, we're able to de-risk electric fleet electrification so operators can remain focused on their core business of moving people or goods. How does Amply Power do that?
Oh, so we really have two core messages around that, right? It's the CapEx OpEx issue. We
Yeah.
know we have the experience, we know how to handle that, but we have software as a service to really incorporate all of the constraints, the rules around the cost of the electricity to really drive the cost to the lowest point for electric fuel, right?
Right.
And because people say, okay, I get it, the OpEx is going to be lower, but the CapEx is so high, and maybe I don't have tax equity or tax liability because I'm public to really take advantage of the tax treatments that are available. And so they're still sort of frozen. Well, we've come up with charging as a service where we will
Hmm.
invest, own, operate, and meet a service level agreement for availability and let's say readiness of their fleet to meet their operating goals at a cost that's known, right? We can
Yep.
charge them on a per kilowatt hour basis. Now they can budget, and plus they've eliminated the capex. It's a pretty nice solution for most people.
Okay. Yeah, that's definitely. I've heard that one before, and it's basically it eliminates that upfront cost, like you talked about, which is such a huge hurdle. So,
And more
so you're
important, I think, for many, especially the public, it sort of gives them a clear budget line item that they can live to, right? They don't have that
Yep.
variability on OpEx.
Okay. So, how does your solution? So you're charging as a service, your software, it integrates with, let's say, it integrates with the telematics of the truck. Is that fair?
Sure. Yeah, we try to capture as much information as we can about the total, the holistic ecosystem that you're living in, right? Because the software really uses rules and the constraints around operation to optimize. A little bit of machine learning in there to grow, but it's really a rules-based system that says, given the constraints of operations, right? The buses have to be out at 7 a.m. with a full charge. Okay, given those constraints and given the cost of energy, given time of use, peak demand, we can manage all of that to make sure that they're meeting all of their goals at the costs that they need to hit.
Okay. So, how do you? I would imagine that if a fleet was going to electrify, right? And I'm the financial decision maker, or whoever's in charge of purchasing for the fleet. It would seem that the easiest path would be, hey, the OEM has stuff like you do, right?
Yeah,
It's easy to just say, oh, well, they can sell me all that at one time. That seems easy enough. Why don't I do that?
the
Why shouldn't
default.
they do that?
That's the
Yep.
default, and often they do, right? And it comes as a package because really the vehicles and the charging system are compatible and they work together, we have no problem with that. And we can actually overlay our system on top of that because we work closely with the OEMs, with all of the electric vehicle charger suppliers. Some of them are white labeling, the vehicles are white labeling others. All of that's fine. We're collecting information from the vehicle telematics, from the EVs themselves, the EV chargers themselves, and managing. But the most important thing that happened, it's not just that first pilot, but it's the scale. Now all of a sudden, a year later, they come back and they've got a new OEM, they've got a new vehicle provider, they've got maybe the vehicle provider has moved on to a new software system and a new EV charger. Now all of a sudden you've got this disparity, right? There's multiple systems to look at. You got different screens. You're trying to manage all of this. We really have found a way to incorporate all of that because we're really agnostic to the technologies, the hardware technologies, and even some of the software technologies. And we're really creating that sort of open system where we can talk and collect and show all of the information and make decisions via this rule-based optimization to make sure that they're meeting their goals.
Okay. And all fleets aren't, I mean, they're not all locked into the same kind of truck, right? Or the same brand of truck. So, if they had to work with the OEMs and they had multiple OEMs in their fleet, that's an issue where you can
that's an issue. That's typically what we call it the mixed fleet or even the mixed equipment issue, right? And then also there's the fact that we're there to make sure that if one piece of equipment goes obsolete or is no longer supported in some way, we continue to provide that proactive service to make sure everything's working.
Okay.
We're sort of the glue to bring it all together.
Right. All right. So you're trying to get a lot of fleets to electrify, obviously, right? Are the utility companies ready for what's coming here?
Yeah, fleets and transportation in general is like over 25% of the greenhouse gas that we're putting out into the world, at least in the US, from what I've heard. Fleets is the best way to attack that, right? I'm sure the individuals eventually will adopt, but fleets is a quick way for us to do that. So we really see that as our mission. And it makes sense to attack fleets because they have the most to gain and have the use cases that make the most sense for this. So we think that fleets will always, let's say, accelerate the industry towards greenhouse gas reduction. And I think that's the best place to focus.
Right.
Okay. I think what was your key point there? What was your question?
Are the utilities ready for that? So you said 25% comes from fleets. So now the utilities have a lot more of a load to deal with. Are they? If this all turns on a dime, or it's starting to turn more quickly now, right? Like and full disclaimer, I think I mentioned to you earlier. One of our biggest clients is Daimler Trucks. They're pushing a lot more electric trucks coming soon. Same with all the other OEMs. If there's a whole bunch more electric trucks on the road in 8 years. Are the utilities companies going to be able to handle the load?
Yeah, I think we're just hitting that curve, that adoption curve. It's going exponential. You're right. And the utilities are scared, but they're excited because unlike solar, solar is great, but it's really taking away from their market, right? The distributed energy resources. So they were really resistant and they had to do it because the Public Utilities Commission said they did. Whereas now they're saying, wow, we can get all that back now. We can take over this huge market. It's like over 20%, maybe even 30% of the energy that we use. Wow, this is great. But then they stop and think, wait a minute, the pace of adoption, that's not the kind of pace that we work at. We work on 10-year timeframes with our integrated resource plan. They don't have 10 years, so they are concerned. They're definitely concerned about that.
Yeah, so I've had, so we do this show about once a month, and I ask that question that I just asked you quite often. And the last two, I've had completely opposite answers from people. I had one guy say, heck no. But to be fair, the guest that said the utilities aren't ready is someone who does solar powered electric chargers. So he might have, I don't want to say he had a bias with his answer, but he might have been right. for sure. But yeah, people seem to see it
I think
differently.
talking to the utilities, they are scared that the pace of adoption will outrun their ability to supply the services needed. Although they're excited and they're trying to ramp up. That's why we do something where we work closely with the utilities and we actually are able to limit automatically the load from all of the chargers to stay within that service requirement until they get it upgraded, right? So that's something that's important about managing the charging. That's really key, I think, to putting in the right infrastructure to support the vehicles now and in the future, while respecting that constraint from the utility until they unlock it.
Okay. All right. So I don't mean to put you on the spot. So you have relationships with utility companies
Well, we talk
when it
to them
comes to
all
stuff like
the
this?
time. Well, I mean, we talk to
Is
them all the time.
is any I don't want to put you on the spot. Is there an example of a utility company that's doing something really, like that they're kind of getting ahead of the game on this? And if it's not, that's fine. But I was just wondering now that we started talking about it.
Getting ahead of the game, you mean? Well, what I think of is New York City Con Ed. We're actually
Hmm.
working with them on a pilot to have the buses at Logan Bus provide energy back to them, not just
Yeah.
reducing their load in this load management, which is like a demand response kind of thing, but actually pushing electrons back to the grid. And it's in pilot, and that's a true B2G solution. And everybody thinks buses really can provide sort of a way to balance a lot of the load on the grid. And it's early days, and I think they're a little bit out in front in terms of piloting that.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love that whole the charging back, like the F-150 Lightning is what that just made me think of. With the you can use the truck to charge the equipment or the
Oh
house
yeah,
or whatever it might be. It's great.
PG&E is actually jumping in with both, I think, Ford and GM to try to test some of that, because they're concerned. Anytime you're putting electrons back on their grid, they have to be responsible for the safety and reliability. But I think they're actually saying, "Wow, let's talk about it and let's look at
Yeah,
this." So that's good.
cool. Um, okay, so you've getting toward more a bigger picture of not just the fleets. I mean, you've been, like we said earlier, you've been in this industry for a long time. You know a heck of a lot more about it than I do. So 5 years from now, like what? I don't want to give you a too open-ended answer. What's this going to look like? Like, how am I going to charge my EV? Am I going to be at home, or am I going to be, doing it at the supermarket when I have what's the cost going to be like? Like, what if you could cut your crystal ball? What do you see changing? Because things seem to be changing quickly.
That's the key. I mean, things are changing so quickly; it's almost impossible to say where we'll be in 5 years. Um, I think it'll be a combination. There's even things like being able to charge while you're parked without plugging in with induction charging. I'd be interested to see where that goes.
Yeah.
Some folks are looking at actually swapping batteries. I think that's not going to play very well. I think your vehicle will be an integral part of your home in
Uh
terms of,
huh.
like we just talked about, being able to supply energy back and forth and determining what's the lowest cost and what's the best use of whatever electricity you have. I think it'll be a more integral part, and you won't even really think about it. You'll plug it in and you use a software like ours to decide, is now the right time to charge? When do I need to have this vehicle ready? So that it'll decide, depending on the load of your house, the cost of electricity, the time of day, the amount of greenhouse gas in the electricity that's coming. We can already measure and track the amount of greenhouse gas coming from the utility at any given moment, so you can minimize your greenhouse gas. So you'll be able to tell it, okay, you'll tell Siri or Alexa or whatever, charge my car, but make sure it's the greenest and it's ready by 7 a.m., right? And it'll happen.
Well, yeah, you said that was going to be a hard answer, but that was a really good answer that you gave on there, because that's a pretty cool idea that people probably don't think about. So I want to go back to fleets. I'm jumping around a little. When I think of fleets, I think about 18 wheelers or UPS trucks or things like that. But cars are part of this equation too on fleets, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I also was surprised to find out that light duty is actually, because it's sort of farther along in the development as well in terms of the products available, right? The big semi truck class eights are great for short haul stuff, but the long haul stuff, that's a ways away, right? There's some technology development and cost curves to attack, but certainly light duty vehicles, passenger type cars are definitely here now. And there's, we're talking to, the big lease companies that are looking at really completely changing out from fossil to electric in a very short time frame.
Like Hertz is doing that now, right? Hertz would
That's
seem
right.
to be the first rental car company to basically say, hey, we're going to be 50% within, a few years or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah. So how are they going to charge all those vehicles, right? That's
Right.
yeah.
Yep.
Where
All
is it
right.
going to be, like hubs, giga hubs at the airport, or are they going to have something? It's going to be interesting to see how that all plays out in terms of the public versus private versus home. Um, we're trying to address it all, and it's a lot happening very quickly.
It is a lot. So you're trying to, yeah, that's just, this is a whole big can of worms that I could open, but I could keep you
Yeah.
here all day. All right. So I'm going to ask you something similar to what I asked you before about the public sector, about utility companies. So my last question to everybody on this show is, what companies, if you had to tell me the way I tend to frame it, someone else I should talk to next time, who in the transportation industry is so forward thinking and doing something really interesting. And it doesn't have to be like, I used to say to people, you can't say Tesla, but I don't have to say that anymore. I would say, who in the transportation industry is doing something really interesting that maybe people don't know about yet.
I think what I'm most interested in and would love to see on your podcast because I want to watch it. The automation side of it all, right?
Yeah.
That's where the interesting things are happening. I mean, certainly Tesla is part of that, but I think there are a lot of companies out there that are really putting a lot of energy and really smart people and technology uh, to solve that problem. And it's gonna happen. It's just a matter of time, I think. I think there's some
Right.
some great companies out there. I don't know them all, and I don't know which one's the best. But like Zoox and Cruise and Waymo and all those folks, they're starting to look at dedicated vehicles, even right
Yeah.
that are without steering wheels. I mean, that's going to be interesting, right? So it may be
See,
that the answer to your last question is in 5 years or maybe 10, we won't even own our vehicles, right? We'll just say, I want to go somewhere and a vehicle will show up.
right. It'll almost be like a neighborhood fleet or an area fleet
Yeah,
that I dial up like an Uber,
yeah,
and it just comes to pick me up, and I don't have a car in my driveway anymore.
yeah.
This is totally fine with me. I'm in on that. So yeah, actually, you were talking about Waymo and Cruise. I think they're both in San Francisco now, or in and around San Francisco. That they
Silicon
literally
Valley.
do have a small number of vehicles. Are you in the Bay? You're in Sacramento or Bay Area? I forget which.
So we're headquartered in Silicon Valley, Mountain View. I'm actually currently located in my home office outside of Sacramento in the
Got it.
foothills.
Yeah, but out near where you are, this is it's much more prevalent or starting to become more prevalent than the rest of the country because California is a leader in green energy and it seems like this is I mean everything's Silicon Valley. This is where things are start up that way, right?
Yeah, it seems like they're already testing on the streets of San Francisco. At some hours of the night, I think they're actually
Right.
out there driving around without people in them.
There's speed limits that they have to adhere to and things like that. It's funny. I joked with one of my colleagues and I wrote in a blog post that in San Francisco. I'm trying to imagine an autonomous vehicle going up Lombard Street in San Francisco
Right.
with a zigzaggy
Like
path. See how
the
it works.
ultimate test, right? Or going
Yeah,
down.
probably do it better than me. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All right, Eric. I think we're gonna wrap it here. Thank you very much for joining me. This was a really good conversation. I really appreciate it. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, John. I really appreciated chatting with you. It was fun. Have a
All
great
right,
day.
everybody. You too. Everybody, you can learn more about Amply Power at its website, amplypower.com, and on social media platforms like LinkedIn and Twitter. Folks, if you enjoyed this show, please subscribe and leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you're watching or listening. It'll help us get the word out, and we will really appreciate it. To learn more about HMH, the Transportation Transformation Agency, visit hmhagency.com or find us on all those usual social media platforms that I mentioned. For Erik Bakke, I'm John Halpin. Thanks for listening. We'll be back soon with a new episode of HMH's Future Transportation Podcast.